Hello and welcome back to another episode of TÄCHES Teaches. I'm Tash, and in today's video I thought it might be quite fun to do a little compilation of these 7 short tip clips that I'd recorded a few months ago and had since forgotten existed until I found them on my hard drive again this morning. So without further ado, let's jump right in and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. When creating drum patterns in our DAWs, we are presented with a choice. Do we use MIDI or simple audio files to lay down our beats? Why would we use one over the other? The way I like to think about it is that MIDI is adaptable but visually dishonest, whereas audio is more rigid but visually honest. What do I mean by honest? I mean that what you see is what you get. Working in audio can be great because anything which we do to the audio clip itself, such as stretch it, chop it, reverse it, increase or decrease the gain, it will all be visually reflected in the clip itself. Sounds that flam, such as claps, are a lot easier to align rhythmically than when using MIDI notes, as you can actually see where the clap starts and ends. Using envelopes to shape the sounds becomes a lot easier when the audio file changes how it looks before your very eyes. It all is visual. Beyond that, I find that, philosophically speaking, I enjoy the sense of commitment that comes with using audio. It's harder to make large changes quickly, such as swapping sounds for others. It can be done, but it is infinitely easier swapping a sample on a MIDI-based instrument than swapping out all of an audio file on your timeline. Indeed, it is a lot easier to have adaptable and in-depth control of each sound when using MIDI. You can modulate and randomize and create movement sonically. You can even randomize timing so that your drums move around the beat each time they play. The addition of velocity control is fantastic for more than just volume dynamics, as we can map velocity to all sorts of other interesting parameters too. I tend to use audio for when I want a sound specifically, and I don't care too much about whether it needs to morph or evolve over the track. This is common with what I call the big 3, the kick, the clap and the hat. There may be many more than just 3 sounds in a track I'm working on, but often the essence of the character comes from those 3 fixed and concrete sounds. Everything else that then adapts and mutates around these foundational and relatively unchanging drums will most likely be made in MIDI, precisely so I can play with the characteristics of the sounds over the course of the track. A wise man once said that if you can't dance to it, you have no business having feet. When making dance music, it's important to check in with the dance floor to see what your music feels like to move to. Often, getting up and just moving your body around to the beat can help you find and even accentuate effective pockets within your grooves. I find that when a groove is particularly good, it tends to command me to move as if by magic. It's not just that I dance to a good groove, it's that a good groove will make me dance, and that can often be one of the best tests. Next time you're crafting a rhythmic bed, get up and have a little dance at the back of the studio, perhaps even on the other side of the wall. You'll be amazed at how much easier it is for your drums to communicate with you when you're moving with them. If you'd like to keep learning cool alternative music production techniques and overall tips and tricks for making the production process easier, as well as cool mindset hacks and workarounds to be able to get out of your own way and get things done quicker, then make sure to subscribe or I will destroy you! One thing that I cannot stress enough is that if it sounds good, it is. There'll be countless people on and offline telling you to do things a certain way, or not to do things another. It's important to remember, though, that other people's approaches may work for them, but not for you, and that is okay. In fact, sometimes other people's approaches may not even work for them. Rules both can and should be broken, unless of course the outcome of that particular rule break just sounds bad to you. Feedback can be handy at times, but be wary of changing things in your music that you like simply because somebody else gave you their differing opinion. If you agree with their sentiment, perhaps change it. But if you disagree, however, just smile and ignore them. Another thing to consider is dynamics, and by dynamics I really mean contrasts. We often hear of dynamics as the difference between the quietest and the loudest sound in a piece of music, but there are plenty more dynamics that can be fun to play with too. Another common example is left to right, a dynamic we can explore through panning. Rhythms can be spiced up by introducing the dynamic of early and late, allowing certain hits to anticipate the beat while others arrive fashionably late. The dynamics of low to high pitches, or short to long decays, or organic and realistic to digital and synthesized will all drastically change the essence of a groove too. You could explore geographical dynamics by combining instruments from different parts of the world, and or indeed different eras. You could explore dynamics in fidelity by combining high-quality audio recordings with the utterly abysmal. In fact, take any concept at all and you will find that it exists as a dynamic. Dark cannot exist without light. Sharp cannot exist without blunt. Life loses meaning without death. What I mean to say by this is that if there is something you would like to highlight, i.e. the bright and tight snap of a rim shot, you could try making all of the rest of your drums darker and have softer transients. The contrast will allow for the thing that you're trying to highlight to pop out like your card from a magician's deck. Much like how different painters will call different densities of paint on their canvases enough, different musicians will call different densities of sounds in their music enough. On the one side of the spectrum, you have minimalism, in that less is more. On the other side, you have maximalism, in that more is more. Everything else exists between these two extremes, and you will find that you will have a tendency towards somewhere on this spectrum. Minimalism can help draw the listener's attention specifically to the few sounds you have chosen to present, while maximalism can often help soften the edges of the listener's focus. If you are honest with yourself, you will know when you have added enough to satisfy the groove, and you will also know when you have added too much and have thus suffocated the beat. I find that I have a pretty high threshold for being able to add more sounds. I have over time moved much more towards maximalism than minimalism, and now tend to easily have upwards of 40 drum tracks before I even start bouncing down. I just love how a dense cloud of slightly differently grooving percussive hits and drums makes me move more than a sharply defined rhythm described with just a couple of sounds. Let's think for a brief moment about the purposes of different drum sounds. A kick drum, for example, will almost always be used as a means of keeping regular and repetitive time. A snare or clap will very often be used as a means to provide extra energy on the backbeats. An offbeat open hi-hat will provide a welcome change after a section of offbeat closed hi-hats. That being said, conventions can often point us in the direction of explorations. Using a clap instead of a hi-hat on the offbeat will set a very different tone to using a cowbell or a rim shot. At times, a simple 4/4 kick might be all that you need to satisfy the groove, whereas at other times you can get away with peppering the bar a little more generously with your kicks. Sometimes you may even notice that adding a snare or a similar sound on the backbeat will actually take away from the magic of the groove that you've created. I find this to be particularly apparent when I'm working on a more 16th note based rolling and hypnotic groove. It's as if as soon as I add that hit on the 2 and the 4, I start to lose the connection to the essence of the groove. There is no rule too hard set in stone that will stop you from assigning the wrong drum to the right place, so experiment away. Of course, there are boundaries where too much experimentation then just becomes ugly, and far too far removed from what anyone in their right mind would want to listen to. I once read a comment on a music forum that made me chuckle. It went like this: I thought using loops was cheating, so I programmed my own using samples. I then thought that using samples was cheating, so I recorded real drums. I then thought that programming those drums was cheating, so I learnt to play the drums for real. I then thought that using bought drums was cheating, so I learnt to make my own. I then thought using pre-made skins was cheating, so I killed a goat and skinned it. I then thought that that was cheating too, so I grew my own goat from a baby. I also think that that is cheating, but I'm not sure where to go from here. I haven't made any music lately, what with all of the goat farming and all. Much like the spectrum of minimal to maximal we discussed earlier, all of us fall somewhere along the spectrum of how we feel about samples. On the one hand, you have people who will make great use of nothing but unedited loops to make their finished songs, and on the other you have the purists who must record every single thing themselves and won't rest until every human on the planet knows how much more work they put in than the rest of us. I suppose the first distinction is whether or not you use samples at all. Some people believe that using one-shots, i.e. kick, clap, hat samples, is okay, but using pre-made loops is not. Some people believe that using one-shots is cheating, and that you must in fact synthesize or record every drum hit that you use. Some people, like myself, couldn't give a flying fuck about what is cheating to the eyes of the public. I will often record and synthesize my own sounds, but I will about equally as much of the time use a sample I find and am to some extent moved by. It all boils down to what you expect out of yourself in music. What are your goals when it comes to what you expect to achieve? My goal is to make a lot of beautiful and groovy music that makes me want to cry a little and dance a little more. Therefore, it is less important to me that I create every single sound from scratch, and more that I connect deeply with the sounds that I'm hearing. I also often aim to provide a feeling of nostalgia and imbue in my music a taste of the past. And so sampling, particularly of unknownish vinyls from the past, is a great way for me to season a song with historical audio that carries with it not just a cool vintage sound, but a deep and genuine story within it too. The beautiful thing, though, is that it is always your choice. People will disagree with you, often quite angrily on the interwebs, about how your approach isn't right, and how their approach is more pure. This is all just noise, however. The answer lies within each of us, and only there. Do what feels right for you and accept that even your approach is likely to bend and sway over time. Well folks, that's sadly all we have time for today, but I do hope that this video has been useful. If you enjoyed it, then please remember to like, comment and subscribe, and smash that notifications bell too, but only if you'd like to keep up to date with all of my future videos. In the meantime, happy Thursday and happy creating.